Hello, BookTube. Well, we continue today with our read-along of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet, the novel that introduces the world, the fictional pairing of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And when we ended the first part of A Study in Scarlet last time, we ended on one of the most perfectly orchestrated dramatic scenes anywhere in pulp fiction, where you'll remember, because we just finished it, Holmes and Watson are in Holmes's rooms with Inspectors Gregson and Lestrade of Scotland Yard. And they're baffled. The inspectors are. They have no idea where to turn in their investigations into two murders now that have happened in London. They're sure the murders are connected, but they haven't the first idea of where to look for the killer. And Holmes seems oddly distanced from their deliberations, oddly carefree. And there's a cab waiting outside, and he is suddenly packing a bag, even though he's made no intimation to Watson that he's going anywhere. And he tells the boy at the door to have the cabman come up and help him with the bags, while the conversation is going on in the room about the case. And Holmes takes out a pair of the latest model of police handcuffs and shows it to Lestrade and Gregson and says, what do you think of these? Are they an improvement on the old model? Just casual conversation with them. And Lestrade says, well, they'd be just fine if I had the right person to put them on. They have no interest in Holmes's small talk about the latest upgrades in police handcuffs. And the cabman comes into the room. Holmes doesn't even look at him and says, could you help me with that bag? And when the cabman reaches down, Holmes snaps the cuffs on him. A mind-bogglingly effective moment. This character who's less than nothing. He's a part of the scenery. And he is the killer. And Holmes knew it, and nobody else does. As Arthur Conan Doyle writes, in the scene, everyone for a moment stands as if they were made of marble. They stand dumbstruck at such a turn of events. And the virtuosity of it is how it comes out of nowhere to the reader. It is a genuine, amazingly orchestrated surprise. And then we break for part two. And part two, I can't do it justice. I'm going to read you how part two, the thing that happens immediately after that incredibly thrilling moment, how the next part of this story opens. In the central portion of the great North American continent, there lies an arid and repulsive desert, which for many a long year served as a barrier against the advance of civilization. From the Sierra Nevada to Nebraska, from the Yellowstone River to the north of the Colorado upon the south, is a region of desolation and silence. Nor is nature always in one mood throughout this grim district. It comprises snow-capped and lofty mountains and dark, gloomy valleys. There are swift-flowing rivers which dash through jagged canyons, and there are enormous plains which in winter are white with snow and in summer are gray with the saline alkali dust. They all preserve, however, the common characteristic of barrenness, inhospitality, and misery. That's the next paragraph. And you wonder what you're doing in the alkali deserts of the American plains, and you think, okay, well, no matter what we're doing, our stay will be short, and it's not. In one of the most baffling narrative decisions that any modern author has ever made, Arthur Conan Doyle decides to stop his story and move with his readers to the scene of the crime. Not the murders in London, but the original crime that birthed the quest for vengeance that gave rise to the murders in London. And he tells that story in elaborate detail of plains and frontier violence and Mormons and every single reader who encountered that immediately after the scene I just described, every single reader who encountered it back in the 19th century wondered what the hell was going on. and I'm here to tell you, having taught this story many, many times, that feeling never goes away. Readers don't understand this decision because it is incomprehensible. Ordinarily, a first-rate genius hack like Arthur Conan Doyle or Edgar Rice Burroughs or any other names that come readily to mind, ordinarily, either their instincts or their very quick revision policy gets rid of obviously bad mistakes like that. And yet every once in a while, it happens 4 times that I know of in the Sherlock Holmes canon, Arthur Conan Doyle either pig-headedly or just blindly omits that safeguard. And so we get a break to the story. There's no other way to put it. It might be one thing if you had a normal armchair detective working away at the details of the case in London. Then a change of pace might be warranted and might work. But instead, you have an absolutely thrilling murder investigation in London that peaks on an incredibly dramatic moment, after which you could have the gunfight at the OK Corral as a change of pace, and readers would still be impatient. They'd still want to go back to 221B Baker Street, and they do. In this, they do. And eventually, Doyle gives them what they want. Eventually, he brings the story back to the reminiscences of Dr. John Watson, and to the killer's reminiscences about his own story. He is in manacles. He is also, as he proves immediately to Dr. Watson, he's not a well man. He has a bad heart and won't live long. And first he puts up a maniacal fight, tries to jump out of the window. But once he realizes that he's fairly caught, he settles down completely. He assures them in ways that they believe that he's not going to make any more trouble, and he tells his story, and immediately every reader who has plowed through that alkali desert of prose thinks the same thing. Well, okay, it wouldn't take more than 20 minutes of massaging this work to encapsulate the story of that crime that you just force-marched us through in the desert into the character's reminiscences about his own story in America and in London. It wouldn't have been hard to do at all. It would have cost pages, but it wouldn't have been hard to do at all. Nevertheless, we mustn't hold it against him. And this character tells a thrilling story. Once it's back in his own terms, once we're back in the present and we know the costs and the realities, and we're more acquainted with the man who did the killing, then it becomes much more fascinating. And the moment this man has chased a killer all the way from Salt Lake City to London. And he's hired himself out as a cabman in order to stay abreast of any hints, any twinging on the spider's nest, to find out where this person is and to kill him. And this is purely biblical. He has no interest in turning him over to the police in London or in his own country. And finally, his plan succeeds, and he has the man he has so long sought directly in front of him in his power. And he says. Where is it? And now, Enoch Drebber, do you know who I am? He gazed at me with bleared, drunken eyes for a moment, and then I saw a horror spring up in them and convulse his whole features, which showed me that he knew me. He staggered back with a livid face, and I saw the perspiration break out upon his brow while his teeth chattered in his head. At the sight, I leaned back against the door and laughed loud and long. I had always known that vengeance would be sweet, but I had never hoped for the contentment of soul which now possessed me. And once the killer is done telling his story, he is led off to prison. The inspectors from Scotland Yard take down his story. They expect to hold it in evidence against him at trial, but he dies immediately of a heart attack, of the very aneurysm that he had warned Dr. Watson about. And the story, the novel, ends just like that. All the pieces are in place. Once the criminal confesses, all the pieces are in place. There's no more mystery. So the story ends in another kind of way. It ends with another kind of satisfaction. And I'm not sure, even having read this many times, whether or not it's a good idea. The break to the salt plains of Utah, I don't have any question about. It's just a bad idea. But the ending, the very ending of A Study in Scarlet, I'm still not sure about. Every time I introduce it to people or teach it, I always ask them, and I'm asking you, what do you think of Arthur Conan Doyle's decision to have Sherlock Holmes explain how he deduces all the details of the crime that he deduces earlier in the novel? It's the last 10 pages of the book, where he leads Dr. Watson through a step-by-step explanation of his deductions. Now, you've just freshly read that description, if you're here now, and I've read it many, many times, and I reread it again for this read-along, and always I'm struck with the same thing. Holmes says when he's introducing his deduction methods and the way he solved the case detail by detail, he admonishes Watson. He says that when we see a conclusion to something, it's easy for us to reason backwards along a chain of evidence and make the most likely deductions at each stage in order to get to the beginning. And what he has done is master the reverse of that process, where he sees the elements and reasons them forward. That's what he tells Dr. Watson. But every time I read his explanation, his narration, essentially, of his own thoughts in solving the crime, every time I read it, I am less and less convinced. The explanations that he gives along the way are clearly reverse engineered. They are clearly the kinds of things you get when you look back from a conclusion. Now, the story won't work if that's true. The scene that I talked about with the handcuffs will only work if Holmes is 10 steps ahead of everybody else, because he genuinely has seen accurately ahead of time. But the explanations for how he got there, I don't believe. The more I read them, just put it simply, the more I read them, the less I believe them. I don't think that Arthur Conan Doyle has actually constructed a way for any character to do what he has Sherlock Holmes then do and claim that he does. It doesn't seem believable to me, and in many other Sherlock Holmes stories, it strikes me as, if anything, even less believable than the narration that we get in this one. So I want to ask you what you made of it all. Not only, I mean, especially, but not only those of you who are reading this for the very first time. Those of you who are reading A Study in Scarlet for the first time, you're encountering Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson on the page for the first time. Oh, not only do I envy you, but I want to know what impression what that description made on you. Did you buy it? Did you believe that Holmes had enough information to figure things out the way he then subsequently says he did? And if he didn't, is he lying to Watson, or is Doyle lying to us? One way or another, I want to hear all of your reactions to this epic novella. This thing changed the literary world and invented a genre, and that makes it noteworthy, even if it weren't so gall dang enjoyable. And that brings us to the end of this read along. But it's still only the 10th of September. We still have plenty of September left, and we haven't picked a book for the rest of September. And I have a suggestion, because this is, I figure. Well, I want to know. I'll put it up for consideration. But the thing that I'm most strongly leaning towards for the rest of September is Sign of the Four. Another Sherlock Holmes novel. It's tremendously good. I think structurally it's more effective than A Study in Scarlet. And if you haven't read it, I think you would really like it. And it'd be fun to do. It's 12 chapters, so we could read 6 chapters for next week, ending with, I think the chapter is Sherlock Holmes Makes a Demonstration or something like that, and then the following 6 chapters, and then that would leave us with 1 week left in September, and maybe the readathons and the read-alongs and the buddy reads are so thick on the ground by then that maybe you'll want a week off. I don't know. Maybe you will. Or maybe I'll just do a very quick read-along for that last week, maybe 1 short story. But one way or another, I thought we'd continue with Sherlock Holmes for next week, and I'm gonna wrap it up there. That is our read along, the second half of Study in Scarlet. So let me know what you think, and please tell me that you didn't stop. Tell me that you like your pioneer ancestors, you just trekked right on through the Alkali Desert to the Promised Land. Well, I'll wrap this up now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.